the last video, we talked about the parts of an inch. And if you remember, we learned that an inch is divided up into 15 parts. All you really have to do to memorize the parts is to know these four fractions: 1/16, 1/8, 1/4, and 1/2. We know all the little itty-bitty lines are all sixteenths. We know the eighths are the next size line, the quarters the next size, and the half is the line that divides the inch in half. Remember the trick. When you're figuring out sixteenths, all you're doing is counting by odd numbers across the numerator: 1/16, 3/16, 5/16, 7/16, 9/16, so on and so forth. So we learned that yesterday. What I want to do now is take what we learned and let's apply it to reading a tape measure in its entirety. So all the projects in our woodshop, and you guys have over 100 to choose from by the time you're in 8th grade, have templates. This is a template for a clock that you can build in 7th grade. On the template, it has two measurements: 3 3/4 by 10 1/8. That shows us what size piece of wood we need to cut out to make this part of the clock. So we would need to cut out a piece of wood that's 3 3/4 wide by 10 1/8 long. So it would look something like this. I might take my tape measure and I might measure out 10 1/8. Now, where is 10 1/8? I know that the 10 is right here, and I know 10 1/8 is going to be between the 10 and the 11. So I'm going to find 10 and the first eighth, and then I'm going to make a mark. The mark that I make, by the way, is called a crow's foot. I make a mark like that instead of a small dot because that's much easier to see. So that's called a crow's foot. Remember that for me. So I just measured out the length of the piece of wood, 10 1/8. Now for the width, we want the width of our piece of wood to be 3 3/4. So I can then go to my square here, combination square. I have it set at 3 3/4. You can see right there, 3 3/4. And then I can actually draw a line all the way across the wood. If I cut out this piece of wood now, the part for my clock should fit perfectly on it, and it does. So next I just need to go over to the saws, and I'd use either a hand saw or one of our power tools to cut out this piece of wood. Now I want to back up for a second and talk really briefly about the tape measure. First of all, the tape measure has a hook on the end. You guys have probably seen this before. The hook is used to hook the piece of wood. The hook actually moves a little bit back and forth. It's kind of a strange thing, and it's supposed to do that. Sometimes people see the hook moving and they think it's broken. Well, it's not supposed to. I mean, it is supposed to move back and forth. The reason why is this. Sometimes we're measuring things by hooking onto the end and pulling, and sometimes we're measuring things by pushing against something. When we push against something, we're measuring from the outside of the ruler, and it needs to push in a little bit to make up for the thickness of our hook. You know what? Some people understand that right away, and other people have trouble with that. If you don't understand what I just said, don't worry about it. Not a big deal. Just remember, this is the hook. Next, when I use the tape measure, I'm always going to hold the tape measure with the hand that I don't write with, because I want to be able to mark things out with my writing hand. In this case, I'm left-handed. I'm right-handed. I'm right-handed. I'm going to hold the tape measure in my left hand, and I'm going to hold my pencil in my right hand. Then I'm going to hook like this. I'm going to mark with my right. Now that puts the tape measure upside down, so it's probably not the best thing for our purposes, because I want you guys to be able to read the tape measure. And finally, when I use the tape measure has this little button right here that you can press that stops the ruler from moving. See that? But instead, I'm actually going to hold the tape measure by grabbing the ruler between my thumb and my finger. I'm going to hold the tape measure like this in the palm of my hand. If you have a tape measure at home and you want to try this, I'd encourage you to go grab it. Try holding it the way I am. Try pinching it between your thumb and your finger. And the tape measure is not a toy, by the way. Please don't take the tape measure and extend it out as long as you possibly can to poke your best friend in the belly with it. And never let it come back like that. Because if you do and your finger's next to it, it can really cut you. So that's the tape measure. Now, as far as reading the tape measure goes, remember, the tape measures we use in our shop are divided up into inches. They're also divided into feet. If you look at the top of this tape measure, the top of the tape measure shows us feet. So this would be 1 foot, 2 inches, which happens to be the same thing as 14 inches, right? 1 foot, 12 inches, plus 2 inches is 14 inches. We're going to try to just use the bottom numbers, so just the inches in our shop to keep things simple. We're going to try not to read things in feet and inches. So instead of saying 2 feet, we would say 24 inches. Okay, the tricky thing that you're going to run up against is reading the tape measure when we need to read it. So if you need, say, to make a mark at 10 and 15/16, where would 10 and 15/16 be? Well, first thing I'm going to do is find the what? The 10. The next thing I'm going to do is look for the next highest number. So in this case, I'm going to look between the 10 and the 11. Does that make sense? So 10 and 15/16 would be between the 10 and the 11. So once I find this part of the tape measure, now all I have to do is locate 15/16. So this comes back to where we learned yesterday. Where's 15/16? Well, 1/16, 3/16, 5/16, 7/16, 9/16, 11/16, 13/16, 15/16. That's 10 and 15/16. So I can do this with any measurement. Where would 34 and 5/8 be? What's the first thing I need to find? 34. Okay, now I just need to find 5/8. Well, I know 4/8 is a half, so 5/8 must be the next eighth beyond. 34 and 5/8. What about 113 and a half? Well, 113, it's going to be between 113 and 114. So 113 and a half. It's really important that you guys can do this. We're going to be doing a lot of measurement in the shop. So if you don't understand this, I want you to go back and watch this video again. If this is making sense, you can move on to the next assignment.